So, in between the Season 2 Invitational in Columbus and Grand Prix Charlotte, I'm going to be hanging out in Roanoke for a bit, so I'm recording this video a little bit early, about a week ahead of time, so as of me recording this, the Invitational's not happened yet, but I do fully plan on playing Jund in that tournament, so hopefully at this point, you know, we have this giant oversized check, giant trophy, and it's all thanks to my buddies Dark Confidant and Tarmogoyf, but even if that's not the case, I'm still probably playing this in Charlotte, so any practice for me is certainly helpful, and I feel like going into these two tournaments, this is probably the deck to beat. A lot of people are talking about it, and I think it's mostly just because Jund has the best card quality, and it's not particularly close, you know, unless someone is trying to do something incredibly linear, you know, some sort of Boggle deck, maybe some sort of burn deck. Jund, pound for pound, has better cards than everyone else, and it has answers to basically everything out there. So it's basically the reason why I like this deck. I mean, you have the early discard, which allows you to interact with almost every single deck in the format. You have Dark Confidant and Tarmogoyf, which are great things to protect with your discard spells. And then Liliana the Veil is just kind of like the giant catch-all, where either it comes down and you make them sack a creature, and then they have to work to actually still get this off the table, or you just go to work on their hand size, and it doesn't really matter if you're flooded or screwed or whatever. Like, Liliana is still going to be there, she's still going to be good, and then you just kind of like clean up with all these removal spells. And one of the things that I like a lot about Jund right now is Kolaghan's Command, and this card does not read super powerful or anything, but the fact that you get two of these modes at any point is pretty insane. Like, you end up getting like more than your mana's worth, I think, just because it's a 2-for-1 for 3 mana at instant speed, and in a deck with a lot of discard, like all the 1 mana hand disruption and the Lilianas, it's not unlikely for your opponent to be empty-handed, and then one of the common modes is actually just during their draw step make them discard a card, so it's kind of like a time walk attached to it also. So you get like the little time walk effect, and then you can either kill a creature, maybe kill their Aether Vial or something, and maybe even bring a creature back. So in these really grindy, mirrorish type matches, or against Grixis Delver, stuff like that, the Kolaghan's commands end up being really, really clutch. So Command has added a lot. It also gives you some main deck affinity hate, which is pretty nice. And then on the top end, I have one Chandra and one Tasigur. And Tasigur might seem kind of like a non-bow with the Dark Confidants, but there's only one Tasigur in the deck, and generally, post-board, if you have Dark Confidant and Tasigur still in your deck, it's because if either one of them is in play, you're probably doing pretty well. So most decks where you want Dark Confidant are not decks that are pressuring your life total necessarily, so you can afford to take 6 every now and then, and especially if it means that you have a Tasigur after that, like it's a pretty big game. I think Dark Confidant did its job at that point, and you know, found you some additional cards and additional threats, and now you should kind of be good to go. So most of the time Dark Confidant dies. That's just what happens. You know, it's a 2/1 creature, it's very fragile, you can't protect it every single time, but if it does live, you generally run away with the game with it, and it doesn't really matter how much damage you're taking as long as you know you're not flipping like Emrakul every single turn or whatever. But like, once you flip Tasigur, that's the only 6, and the most you can take is 4. Usually you'll be taking like 0, 1, or 2. So even if you take 6 once, it's really not that big of a deal. I don't necessarily want to start both Tasigurs because there's the additional risk, right? Like, if you flip 6 twice, maybe you lose. So you have to be a little bit careful, but I think one Tasigur is kind of a free roll. It's not going to come up very often. I've played maybe 50 to 75 matches with this deck, and it's happened to me exactly once. So it's worth it. I think it is worth it. Other than that, the mana base is kind of similar to other Jund decks. The only difference being I have a couple of Ghost Quarters and 25 land, so most people only have 24, so I run the risk of flooding out a little bit, but I have these Ghost Quarters and Raging Ravines that are pretty good flood insurance. And Ghost Quarter has been very helpful against things like Inkmoth Nexus and Urza Lands and things like that. So definitely like Ghost Quarter over Tectonic Edge because it doesn't have an activation cost. You can just use it right away. You're not really worried about trying to constrain them on resources. I want the Ghost Quarters to fight the lands that I'm scared of, and a lot of the decks that have lands that I'm scared of don't necessarily have a 4th land in play all the time. So if they go like Tron Piece with an Expedition map in play or something, like you need to Ghost Quarter them right then and there. You know, you don't get to wait until they have 4 mana to use Tectonic Edge because that's not very realistic. So they end up searching up a basic, but it's really not that big of a deal. I highly recommend trying out Ghost Quarter if you have not already because it helps a lot in your bad matchups. And then the only other weird thing that I have going on here is probably this one Dismember, and I would play 4 Terminates if I could, but the issue is that Scavenging Ooze requires a bunch of green, Liliana requires a bunch of black. We really want to play at least 1 Twilight Mire, and I kind of want a second, really, but the issue with that is when you start playing a bunch of Twilight Mires and sometimes some Ghost Quarters and like you have this basic forest too, the Terminates are not great. And I would probably play 4 Terminates if I could, but I don't feel like we can try and jam all that stuff into the same deck because the consistency kind of goes out the window. So we have a Dismember basically instead of the 4th Terminate. And Terminate is slowly replacing Abrupt Decay. And it's nice because with Kolagon's command, you don't actually need Abrupt Decay as much. So you have other ways to kill Cranial Plating and Aether Vial. And the only thing that you end up being a little bit weaker to is some enchantments. So right now I don't have a lot of enchantment removal, but the only things that really play enchantments are things like Boggles, and Liliana is way more important than stuff like Abrupt Decay in that matchup. You can definitely get hands where Abrupt Decay is actually able to keep them off tempo for long enough. Maybe you're able to race them or something, or buy time until you find Liliana, but for the most part you don't really need the enchantment removal. So I do like having more Terminates, but again, the Twilight Mire, the green mana, the black mana, the Ghost Quarters, you know, you can't really afford to be playing a bunch of Terminates. I tried. It did not work out so well. And then the sideboard's up in the air. It's always up in the air. It depends on what you expect the format to look like. It depends on whether or not you're willing to just kind of concede to certain matchups. There are things like Burn where I could totally see just not playing any cards for them. Affinity's kind of the same way. Maybe Affinity's not very popular, possibly because people are all playing Kolagon's command. So, you know, maybe you can skimp here or there, try and make up your percentages in other places, and I feel like that's a reasonable enough strategy. But this sideboard is kind of like the ultimate hedge, where I'm trying to have a few cards against every single deck, so we have a shot against everything. I thought that would make for the best video, so that if we play against something like Burn, you know, maybe we're just not drawing dead. But I've even played against Burn a few times without Feed the Clans, and I won. So it was kind of shocking to me, but the deck still has game. So the sideboard cards I think are kind of locks are Leyline of the Void, and I like this card a lot against the Collected Company Malira decks. I also like it against Tasigur Snapcaster Mage decks. So Grixis Delver, they have Snapcaster and Tasigur and Kolagon's command also. So if you're able to put a Leyline of the Void into play, their best cards are just gone. You know, they don't have like the Gurmag Anglers and Tasigurs to pressure you with. They don't have the card advantage from Kolagon's command or Snapcaster. They're basically relying on Delver of Secrets and Young Pyromancer to kill you with at that point. And, you know, Jund is great at killing little creatures. So Leyline is kind of a KO. You know, you still have to work for it a little bit. You can't like mold a 0 or mold a 1 and put in a Leyline and still be okay, but if you have any reasonable hand with a Leyline, I think it's a pretty easy win. We have Knight of Souls Betrayal for Lingering Souls, Affinity, and stuff like that. We have a Duress for combo decks and Burn. We have another Tasigur for matchups where you want another threat, like the games come down to top decking, so the mirror matches or any sort of grindy deck, really. And then Olivia takes over the game against green mid-range decks. We have a couple Fulminators for mostly Tron, but you also bring him in against Affinity, sometimes the mirror matches, definitely against Jeskai because you need a way to kill Celestial Colonnade. But Tron is the big concern here. And then we also have a Boom Bust, and this could be a Sowing Salt, but I think Boom Bust might be a little bit better. Basically, I wanted 3 Fulminator Mage type things, but I was only really bringing in 2 Fulminators against non-Tron decks, so I felt like the third one could be more of a heavy hitter, and Boom Bust seems like that card. Like on turn 3, you can boom their land and your fetch land, sack your fetch land in response, and still be able to play a 1-mana spell, maybe a discard spell in that turn, or you can Ghost Quarter, or you can Boom Bust your Ghost Quarter and their land, and in response Ghost Quarter them. So it's still effectively a 3-mana Stone Rain. Sometimes it's a 2-mana Stone Rain where you have to sack a land, so a raise. But there are enough upsides on turn 3 or, you know, maybe turn 4 or something where the fact that Boom Bust only costs 2 is actually pretty nice. Plus, if you get to the late game against something like Jeskai and you have the 6-mana Armageddon, like that's probably lights out for them too. Then we have a Jun Charm, which is some decent utility. You have a nice little sweeper here. You have some additional graveyard hate if a deck is going super deep on their graveyard, something like Dredgevine or Storm. Against Burn, I'll bring it in because maybe they have like a triple 1-drop draw and you get to kill all their stuff. Or you just put counters on a Goy for a Scavenging Ooze and actually start clocking them, which is pretty nice. And then we have some Feed the Clans, couple artifact removal spells, and the Shatterstorm is kind of similar to the Boom Bust, where you could load up on Ancient Grudges and still potentially lose. So if you're playing a card specifically for Affinity, like it comes in against Affinity and basically nothing else at the top end, I think I want it to be a Shatterstorm, because it just cleans up everything, which is so nice. And you generally have enough removal to survive in the early game that you can actually buy time to get to this Shatterstorm. So I definitely like the Boom Bust. I like the Shatterstorm. Maybe the Boom Bust is better as a Sowing Salt or something, but that's about it. This is my Jun deck, and this is me kind of trying to beat everything, so we'll see if that works out.